right, good morning and welcome back. We're glad to have you here. I'm delighted to have you here this morning. We have a very big day and I'm excited about it. My name is Irene Dupree Gutierrez. I'm chair of the Education Committee. We are the ones sponsoring this day. And whenever we do outreach, it's so good to have people respond to us. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to thank everybody who's been a part of this. The Education Committee put it together, yes, but without huge amounts of help from the Quaker population, this would not have happened. They've been wonderful. And they have opened the Quaker Meeting House to us today, a number of things that we just could not have done without it. At this point, I'm going to get out of the way. Let me introduce Mr. Bob Kelly, sitting here. You may have seen him in the video just a couple of minutes ago. Mr. Kelly, would you like to come on up?
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. The reason why I think I've been asked to introduce Mr. Salvador is that I am the great grandson of Paul Cuffee. And I would like to thank the National Park Service and the Friends for putting on this program and for asking me to participate. Reverend Pam Cole wanted to be brief, but she also asked me to answer 3 questions. The first is, when did I first know that I was a descendant of Paul Cuffee? And probably when I was 12 or 13. It didn't make that big of an impression on me. Like Paul Cuffee, my mother was a Wampanoag. My father was of African descent. My mother's father, also, he was a great-grandson of Paul Cuffee, was a chief of, it's either called the Dartmouth branch or the Westport branch or the Coxet branch of the Pocasset Wampanoag tribe. And I was more interested in the Indians. My grandfather claimed that he was a direct descendant of Massasoit. I have a newspaper article to that effect. I could never substantiate or refute that claim. Pam also asked me to say, well, when did it dawn on me the contributions that Paul Cuffee had made? And that really started around 1977. Alex Haley's mini-series Roots aired in early 1977, and I remembered, Grammy and Auntie Dot have this 1906 letter, and it was written, it was given by my great-grandmother to my grandfather, given to my mother's father by his mother, and it listed Kofi, Slocum, Ruth Moses, all of their children, including Paul Cuffee, and then the second generation, and even in some places, the third generation. So starting with that, I went to the 1977, there were no computers. I went to the state archives and looking for vital statistics and was able to trace my lineage back to Paul Cuffee. Along the way, I came across a book by Sheldon Harris. And I also came across a master's thesis in the UMass Boston library, and they had many articles, and I just dawned on me, wow, just the number of things that Paul Cuffee did. And the last question she wanted me to talk about was, how am I gathering books and gaining information about him now? There were 3 groups of people that I think were important in Paul Cuffee's life: the Native Americans, the African Americans, and the Friends. And as you read Mr. Salvador's book or any of the other books, you'll see that in the turning points of his life when he needed help, there was usually a discussion or some assistance from a friend to Paul Cuffee. And so what am I doing now? Well, I had the pleasure of meeting Lamont Thomas. His book is Rise to Be a People, an autobiography of Paul Cuffee. Very scholarly piece, fantastic bibliography. Also met a New Bedford resident by the name of Brock Cordero. Brock was getting a master's degree at UMass Dartmouth. Again, a fantastic bibliography. But that's not the best source. Some of the authors, they can give you a big picture, so you can see the forest. But if you want to see the trees and the leaves on the trees, you have to talk to the friends. One of the board of trustees at the Paul Cuffee School in Providence, Rhode Island. Part of our library is the Rosalind Cobb Wiggins collection. Posey, I think, was her nickname. And a couple of years ago, we were at the Westport Friends Meeting House celebrating the 250th anniversary of Paul Cuffee's birth. We were at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and Pam Cole, Reverend Cole, had a book like this. It was a book by Posey Wiggins, Captain Paul Cuffee's Logs and Letters, 1808 to 1817. So I've actually been able to go on the internet and get a copy of the book for myself. But that level of day-to-day detail, that's information that the friends have. When we were at the 250th anniversary celebration in Westport in 2009, I came across people who were related to Dr. Handy. Dr. Handy was Paul Cuffee's personal physician. He's mentioned on page 68 of Mr. Salvador's books of when Paul Cuffee paid his last medical bill. Also there, I think I ran into Richard Kugler, who I believe was a former president of the New Bedford Whaling Museum. He had a manifest, and one of his one of his ancestors had purchased a share of a ship that Paul Cuffee also owned, so they had who the crew was on the ship and the ship's manifest. But I've realized that if I want to see the trees and the leaves on the trees and get the details about everyday life of Paul Cuffee, that the friends are the people with that information. I'd like to introduce George Arnold Salvador. Mr. Salvador is a lifelong resident of Dartmouth. Until 2005, members of his family operated Salvador's Diary, where the familiar Big Milk Can ice cream stand is located on Smith Neck Road. After graduating from Dartmouth High School, Mr. Salvador enjoyed studying at several institutions of higher education, including Dean Academy, Providence College, Bridgewater State Teachers College, now Bridgewater State University, and the University of Rhode Island. While at the University of Rhode Island, he had a professor who encouraged him to study the civil rights movement in general and Paul Cuffee in particular. Mr. Salvador taught history at Westport High School and at Bishop Connolly High School, and while teaching, he continued to take courses. He studied at Harvard University Summer School. He studied at the University of Stockholm, where he studied 18th and 19th century European history. He also studied about the Reformation in Scandinavia. All told, he has a Master's of Education and a Master's of Art in history. He retired from teaching early to take care of his mother, who was ill for several years before her death. And now he has time to enjoy interests he didn't have time for when he was teaching, especially the theater, and in particular, the Second Story Theater in Warren, Rhode Island. I present Mr. George Salvador.
I thank our distinguished guest, and I just asked him, how did you know all that? I don't even know some of that. I did that? I've had quite a career, I guess. And you know, my father was so disappointed with me as a young man. I didn't like school. I hated school, especially high school. And he wanted me to go to high school and then from there go to some medical school. So he wanted me to be a dentist. I didn't want to be a dentist. I didn't like dentists. And also, you had to know about science and all that. And you had to know about math and all that. I wanted literature. I wanted words. My father said that was ridiculous. I would never make anything in my life if I became a teacher. He heard that, Bruma. So we had to compromise. I said, well, I'll try to apply to this school, such and such a school, and if I can find anything I like of it from after a year, not a year, a semester, I might think about seriously staying there. But if not, I leave, and we don't discuss this topic anymore. I don't know what I was going to do, but I went to school. I went to Dean Academy because my marks were so bad at high school. And in Dean Academy, living away from home and doing many exciting things with people I've never met before and learning something about different people in different places, I loved it. I love school. I found that. And as you heard from that list of schools I've gone to, I found myself in a place that was comfortable. Even going to Sweden, when I heard that there was an opportunity for people to get to understand more of the Swedish way of life, and that was quite an accomplishment, I must say, so I liked it. But my big thing has been the Paul Cuffee book. Many of you probably have read the Paul Cuffee book. I had met a woman in Westport, Eleanor Tripp, who was so kind to me. She's passed away now. She said, I have been saving many things, and this is what you can start with for your research on Paul Cuffee. And she led me to this and this and this, and it was wonderful. And then I was told, now you go to the New Bedford Library. There's someone there who can help you further. And I did, and I was told that they had nothing on the shelves about Paul Cuffee that they knew that was worthwhile, but in the attic, there had been a librarian just prior to and during the Civil War who collected a lot of material about Paul Cuffee. I think his intent was to write a book with this after the war, but he died before he was able to do it. And so the New Bedford people just kept this stuff stored, stacked in the library in the attic. And up I went, and there I found remarkable things, letters, bills, off-the-cuff remarks, and all that. It was wonderful, and that became the basis of a lot of my material to write this book. What I found out was Cuffee was a remarkable man in his time, in any time. He relied upon his religious friends, and he became a Quaker, continually asked their advice, continually was directed by them. They were I think his whole means of progressing to the next step in his desire to help his fellow blacks. Cuffee realized he could not end slavery. People say to me, oh, was his problem? Was that his goal? I don't find that as his goal. I find that he wanted to do something about the situation, and in his way, he could see in the North where he lived, there were blacks who were no longer slaves. Many had become free men, but they were discriminated against in so many ways that opportunity was practically nothing for them. And his conclusion was, remove them from this country. Go back to Africa. Later became known as the Back to Africa movement. And there, maybe you can start life again with the right friends in the right direction, and life will be more meaningful for you than it will be in this country. His feeling was that this country will never change. This country will have slavery, and even if there's a civil war, the prejudice against blacks will continue. Well, he was right on that, but he certainly forgot the civil rights movement that developed in our time. which was a remarkable time. So I found Paul Cuffee through these people. And through these people, I began to develop. I wanted to show the time period in particular. I wanted to show his dealing with the officials in Sierra Leone, this place in Africa that he landed on, and he felt that these people here, now under British rule, will be able to help him, and it looked like they would. And then he was invited to London to speak to a group of English people who were anxious to end the slavery movement, and then eventually, hopefully, slavery. If any of you have seen the motion picture, Grace, isn't it? Can't think of the name of it right now. It went right out of my mind. It was done beautifully about that. The song that we sing about, excuse me? Amazing Grace, thank you. That's what I'm looking for, the title of it. That is a wonderful movie, and it shows certainly the English viewpoint with some people in England on that level. It was just great. So I tried to develop that, and then in the end, his untimely death. He had so many dreams, and possibly it would have worked in many ways. Other people say it probably wouldn't, because after a while, when the Civil War was ended, and blacks felt that they had helped to make this country, certainly they did, so why should they leave now? It's the country who should adapt itself to the blacks rather than blacks to the country. And that would seem to be the thing that Cuffee couldn't quite approve of. He felt it's best to leave this place, to get away. It's too deeply entrenched in the whites, their hatred and their discrimination. So it's kind of a tragic life, but yet he was always optimistic. Always optimistic. It must have been his religion. But he was also, at the same time, practical. He was from a Yankee area. He became, in a sense, a Yankee. And he knew business. He had good teachers, mainly from New Bedford. These families who became the leaders of New Bedford were quite often Quakers. And they opened their doors to him. They were willing to help him, set up ships and so forth for him. And he learned a great deal, and he learned their practicality. So he was a balanced man. He knew the practical way, and he knew the exciting dream way, hopefully. Those are my views as I have read and reread and thought about Cuffee that I got out of the book. Very important to me. But there may be some things that you'd like to ask me, or some comment you'd like to mention about the time period or Cuffee or whatever. I open it to you. Anyone here have any thoughts? Yes, go ahead.
I really appreciate getting a chance to hear you speak about Cuffee, and I have read the book, and I couldn't put it down, and I was struck by a couple of things. One being how you tell the story of Cuffee's life in a very straightforward manner, and yet at the same time elicits some really poignant truths and makes some observations that, quite frankly, I hadn't thought about before. You talked about his being practical, and I was struck how, despite his having been African American at a time when it was not a good thing to be African American and Indian, he was able to cultivate those relationships with Quakers like William Roach and Moses Brown, and these were names that I've seen on buildings or on maps, but I never really understood the significance and the relationships that Cuffee was able to develop in that particular era. It was fascinating. You also made a comment that if around the time of the 1812 war, that I think it was on June 16th, there was an incident, and that 2 days later, war was declared. But if we had had the communications capability, that would never have even happened, and his life might have been completely different. And I wonder if you've often thought about, or have ever thought about, what might have changed for Cuffee and the way he ended up, if that situation hadn't happened with the war, if Congress had been supportive of him at that particular time.
That was so ironic that we could have avoided the war because of lack of rapid communication. But even if we hadn't, I think Cuffee could not adjust to the change. In his heart, his conclusion was, we will never find a place of hope here in America. We will never be accepted. He couldn't accept, he felt that, where other blacks could not accept his views. When the civil rights movement developed in the 1960s, so forth, the voices were not for Paul Cuffee. They knew about Paul Cuffee, many of the leaders of the civil rights movement, but Paul Cuffee didn't represent their goal. Their goal was to be part of this place, to be meaningful in this area, and to achieve something. Cuffee said it had to be out of here, out to Africa. So I don't think he would have fit in. I admired his ability to do all these things. He wasn't a very well-educated man. Reading some of his letters, it was very difficult. But he knew what he wanted, and he knew how to work with people. He knew how to flatter people, too, I must say. And that was interesting. I'll be right with you. I was always disappointed that when he went to see James Madison, our president, thanks to Dolly Madison and her connection with the Quakers, the president was to try to help him regain his ship that had been confiscated because we were at war with the British. And we didn't want them in here, and the rule was if you go, we will confiscate. You're going to stay in your port until the war is over or something else. So he wanted his ship back and the goods on his ship. And he finally went to speak to James Madison. But in his write-up of this meeting, he only says the president was kind. The president felt he could not help him, but we could turn him over to someone else who might. And he never said anything more about the president. That would be an interesting session to see. The president of the United States who had slaves on his plantation, and this black man who was most remarkable at that time period. And we don't know what they said. I was always a little angry with Paul Cuffee about that. Well, why didn't he say more? Why didn't he tell us more? However, yes, you had a question.
George, I'm not sure whether you're aware of it now or not, but we are now teaching the life of Paul Cuffee on our tours with the kids at the Whaling Museum.
Really?
Yes, we have the Paul Cuffee Kitchen exhibit.
Oh,
And he's a regular part of our tours with the kids.
that's great.
It is.
I didn't know that.
And I think
How's it going over?
It's amazing that the kids didn't really know much about him.
I find that too.
And I think they're kind of intrigued because of his heritage and his makeup and things like that. And because we have the Cape Verdean exhibit also, we talk about Sierra Leone and bring that part into it. So it's really changed a lot since you were there.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yep.
I first started teaching on a full-time basis at Westport High School. And it was from Westport High School that I was granted a year's leave of absence to work on my material from Paul Cuffee. And I often asked some of the students about Paul Cuffee, and it was blank. Who's that? I said, but you're from Westport. So what? That's the attitude. So what? I said, just down the road, the Quaker Meeting House, the big stone out in front commemorating Paul Cuffee. Who was he? What did he do? And I was always amazed. He was neglected in his own town, but maybe that's the way it goes. Isn't there something from the Bible like that? Yeah, interesting. Someone else had a comment, a question? Okay. Sierra Leone, I want to mention this. I've never been to Sierra Leone. I imagine it's some exotic place along the coast of Africa, and I found out, in the bulge of Africa, it's down here somewhere. I wasn't aware that they had gone recently through a very devastating civil war. It's devastating. I didn't realize all this. And then I had visited some friend of mine in Little Compton, And he introduced me to a man who was from Sierra Leone. It's a tall black man, made two of me. He was amazing. What a powerful voice. He said, I am a priest. I speak at the Mass for the father, the priest who was in charge while he goes on his rest. So I got to know this man, and he got to know me. He said, I've been anxious to find out who you were and where you were. And he found out I wrote this book. He saw my photo on the back, which has changed considerably. But he said, I've always wanted to speak to you. And he asked me various questions about Cuffee. But he said to me, after that terrible civil war, many of our homes were destroyed, buildings were destroyed, but the schoolhouse frame stood. But the interior was destroyed completely, and we are now trying to rebuild this. And I've come to America to raise funds to help rebuild the schoolhouse. And when I do, I'm going to make sure that on the front it honors Paul Cuffee. Did you want to say something to me? Okay. All right. I want his name over the main door, Paul Cuffee. He said, because we know that he died here in Sierra Leone many, many years ago. And he's buried here, but we don't know where. We think all of this was destroyed, all the records and so forth, during the Civil War. I said, I think you're wrong. He did not die in Sierra Leone. Oh, but we all know that he did. I said, he died here in Westport. I can show you his grave. Oh, he was thrilled with this. Where? Meet me at the meeting house on Main Road, and I will meet. It was a cold February day. Oh, was it cold? And there he was with his tall body, waiting there for me at the meeting house. I said, well, we'll have to go around the back. And around the back, over to the corner, like near the stone wall, was his burial ground. He is this marker, little stone, with his wife, Alice. His wife was Indian too, like his mother was Indian. And he was thrilled that he had found it. And all these photos he was taking, and I was shivering there. Oh, he said, no, I want you to take one of me. Now take it from this shot. And I was all over the place. And the camera was going like that. And he said, well, wait a minute. I'll see if I can get it to take a picture of both of us. And you're so cold, I'll put my arms around you. I've never seen the photo. I'd like to see it. But that was his most cherished gift he could take back to Sierra Leone when he's gone back. That he found the actual grave, and all of the other comments about Sierra Leone being the burial place of Cuffee just was not accurate. This was accurate because he could touch and take this photo. So I was glad to make his acquaintance, and glad to know that there are people who in other parts of the world who know about Paul Cuffee and want to do something about him in his memory. And with that, I think I've rounded up and I've ended everything, unless you have anything else you'd like to say. Anything about the book? Yes.
I did want to say I lived part of the year down south, and I've tried to study some of the early African-American history there. And many of the slaves on the plantations came from Sierra Leone, because they had a culture of rice planting in the northwest of Africa. And we think in terms of the plantation owners starting this culture of rice planting, but it was really the slaves. They not only did the terribly hard work, terrible work, and mosquito-infested marshes and everything.
And the heat of the
But
summer, too.
They were not only the brawn, they were the brains of these huge plantations in the south, that we think in terms of the plantation owners doing the work, but I think they just rode around in their horses.
That's an interesting angle. I've never heard about that.
Perhaps you'd be interested in following it up with some of the scholars down there, Black American scholars who have studied the patterns, the places where the slaves initially came from, and from my understanding, most of them came from the northwest of Africa.
Thank you. Yes, Bob?
George, can you talk a little bit about his early days as a trader and a shipbuilder?
His early days?
How he got to be successful?
Oh, yes. Well, his success was first in his own abilities, and then his connection with the leaders here in New Bedford, who were anxious to do something to help him because he showed such great promise, and they financed some of his early beginnings. They showed where their boats were made, and he was allowed to make his boats there, and then certain customers, you might say, along the coast were there available and would share them with you, especially when he got down to Philadelphia, which was very important with Quakers. And there are many doors open to him in Philadelphia, and he was very capable of handling his money. And he knew wisely how to spend it and why to spend it. And that's another great thing. He's a very practical man, I found that. Was there another comment or question? Well, I thank you very much, and I turn it back to Becky.
Want to watch your local access shows on demand? It's easy. Just go to www.nbcablenetwork.com. Place your cursor over either the Channel 17 or 18 tab and click on Program Schedule. Here, you'll find a calendar and a list of shows for that day. You can watch any show that says View next to it by clicking on the word View. It's just that simple. Now you can watch any of those shows at your convenience. You can also watch whatever is currently playing on the air by clicking Watch Live at the top of the page. And best of all, our shows can be viewed from anywhere in the world. New Bedford Cable Network, bringing you original programming and keeping you informed about local government, educational, and public endeavors.
That's right. I think my purse is upstairs on the bed. It's not here. Check the dining room. No. What about your sister's room? It's not there either. The upstairs closet? The downstairs closet? There are no more closets.
Moms everywhere are finding ways to keep kids active and healthy. Get ideas, get involved, get going at letsmove.gov.